Game 2 has just wrapped up in the Stanley Cup Final. How about Evan Rodriguez? Game tied in the third. Look at that. Top shelf in the left corner. He added another goal after that. And the Florida Panthers, look at that tip in. Great timing, amazing precision. These guys, world-class athletes, baby. The Panthers go up 2-0 on the Edmonton Oilers and Connor McDavid. Whew. They're 2 games away, y'all, from getting that Stanley Cup. And look at this. When teams go up 2-0 in the Stanley Cup Final, they're 49-5. So there's a high probability, very high probability, that the Panthers are going to be experiencing a Stanley Cup celebration when this series is over. But for now, all they've done is just take care of business at home. Time now to welcome in CBS Sports hockey analyst Todd Fuhrman and Pete Blackburn. And the Panthers in Game 1 found a way to win, y'all, after getting beat in almost every category on the stat sheet. On this night, though, the Panthers made it happen in all 3 phases of the ice. Pete, what exactly did you see from the Panthers that really stood out to you the most?
An incredible defensive effort. When you look at the underlying statistics, 1 high danger chance given up by the Florida Panthers in this game. An unbelievable defensive effort. And if you had told me that the Edmonton Oilers would have scored 1 goal through 2 games of the Stanley Cup Final and it would come from Mattias Ekholm, I would say that would be a very, very big problem for the Edmonton Oilers. So expected a much better game from the Panthers in Game 2 than what they showed in Game 1, in which they were severely outplayed. I don't know if I expected this good of a game from Florida, at least defensively, because they shut it down, gave up almost nothing in the high traffic and high danger areas.
You know, I'm right there with you, Pete, and I think when you look at those high danger chances, the fact that they gave up 0 at 5-on-5 is simply incredible. And I know when we talked in the wake of Game 1 that Edmonton was probably a little bit unfortunate to come away with a 3-0 defeat after they were the better team for 40 minutes. It wasn't until Florida had to protect the lead in the 3rd period of Game 1 that you started to see some teeth from this Panthers team. But I think their quotes leading up to the game today, they realized they were extremely fortunate. It was Florida that came out and played with a sense of desperation early on in this game. To Pete's point, they were outstanding and airtight defensively. They didn't give McDavid, Draisaitl, or anybody else wearing a white sweater room to breathe, and it made life significantly easier for Sergei Bobrovsky. Now, the big question that the Panthers are going to be worried about from now until puck drop on Thursday night of Game 3, what price did they have to pay to get this victory? If they're without Sasha Barkov, who has a history of head injuries, that is an absolutely massive loss, and there's not a player on this roster, even Bob, that couldn't be replaced if Sasha Barkov does miss some time. So as a hockey fan, you hope that they're going to be at full strength. And quite frankly, guys, I expect more from a player cut from the same cloth as Leon Draisaitl to resort to those kind of tactics and the cheap shots that we've grown accustomed to from 4th liners in the past.
So do you think?
Yeah, I was going to jump in and say that hit from Draisaitl was really bad. It was tough. He left his feet. He delivered the elbow straight to Barkov's head. A really bad hit. I thought he got very lucky, only getting 2 minutes for that hit. So we'll see if anything else comes from it. I'd be surprised if they suspended Leon Draisaitl. But I mean, if you take out Sasha Barkov with that quality of hit or lack thereof, I think there should be a price to pay.
So what would be the price? Like outside of, like, do you feel the price was fair in this case?
Not for 2 minutes, no. I mean, 2 minutes well worth it if you're Leon Draisaitl in the Oilers. But I think that a hit like that potentially takes Florida's most important player out of the series, potentially. I don't know. I don't want to jump to conclusions, but I would say that's at least a 1-game suspension, or it should be.
Yeah, you never know how these things go, because in the Stanley Cup Final, whether it's NBA Finals, you want the stars out there. So sometimes, you know, it's a little dicey with what they're going to do. But I'll go to you, Todd. Now, when it comes to what the Panthers have to do if Barkov can't do, if he can't go, who do you think has to step up in his place?
I think you have to see more out of Matthew Tkachuk. I mean, he was the kind of folk hero that the Panthers needed through that improbable run last year before they came up just short in the Stanley Cup Final against the Golden Knights. He was the one scoring all of those game-winning goals, whether they came in overtime or the waning seconds of regulation. But look, Tkachuk doesn't offer some of the two-way capabilities that Sasha Barkov does. And I think the most valuable role that the captain has played for Florida is what he's doing on the defensive end. I mean, he has been an absolute thorn in the side of Connor McDavid. And I know you lose last change when you go out on the road, but not having his ability as a 200-foot centerman is absolutely massive. And I think Paul Maurice and company would have to try and figure out the best way to go about defending some of the top players for the Oilers. And it would make that line that hasn't produced of, Zach Hyman, Connor McDavid, and Ryan Nugent-Hopkins so far in the series that much more potent. The other thing that I'm curious to get Pete's take on as well, Chris, when I watched the first two games in Florida, that ice quality didn't look to be up to snuff for me. There were a lot of pucks bouncing off of players' sticks. It looked like a lot of the guys were skating in mud. I don't think that's going to be the case when we shift north of the border, where you should get a significantly faster sheet, which also plays into the hands of the Oilers as they try and erase this 2-0 series deficit.
Yeah, Pete, what did you think about, the way the ice played here tonight?
I didn't notice it too much, but if that's the case, it might be karma coming back to bite Paul Maurice, who had a lot of things to say about the ice in New York during that series. So who knows? I think that I would certainly expect good ice in Edmonton, that's for sure.
Yeah, definitely hope for that. Now for the Oilers, we talked about it. The big guns, they were held without a goal for the second straight game. Connor McDavid does get a point. What have the Panthers done specifically to keep guys like Connor McDavid, Leon Draisaitl, out of the back of the net, because this is something, or this attack is extremely explosive, as we've seen in the past postseasons?
Yeah, well, it's Florida's forecheck. It's their calling card. They take away time and space. They're suffocating. They're in your pocket. That's kind of what we expected from Florida. It's their biggest strength. Like I said, I didn't expect them to be this good in terms of taking away the high danger opportunities. One is insane, and there you see it. It's Connor McDavid on a 4-on-4 breakaway. That's the one time in this game that Edmonton was able to get behind Florida's forecheck. So that we saw it a lot more in game one, where their aggression can come back to bite them. But it didn't really happen so much in this game, and good on them for keeping the play in front of them and still being aggressive enough to take away that time and space.
I think when you look at Florida, I mean, they gave up a couple of breakaway opportunities for Edmonton, fortunately in game one, that the Oilers weren't able to convert. And that had to be a point of emphasis for Florida when they tried to tweak their game plan and approach. The only goal that Edmonton put on the board tonight came when they were overly aggressive at 4-on-4. It allowed Matthias Ekholm to have a ton of time and space. And there's no doubt that that's a goal that Bob would want back and probably would have stopped in game one when he was on. But at the same time, Florida regrouped completely. And the one thing that we've seen, if they're not going to allow number 97 to get a full head of steam, and he did have a couple of opportunities, Florida has done an excellent job trying to keep that cycling to a minimum in their defensive zone, and it's really paying dividends. And I think when you look at some of the contributions that Florida is getting from up and down the lineup, I mean, Paul Maurice made a comment in that series against the Rangers that said this time of year, the players almost feel like they're coaching themselves. And I get this sentiment from reading some of the players' comments, listening to some of the questions that they were forced to answer in the wake of a 1-0 win, that they felt like they had lost that opening game. You saw them tighten up, and Pete referenced it at the top, talking about how good this team has been defensively, how they wear you down, and when they continue to put bodies on those Oilers defensemen on the forecheck, it becomes even more problematic if a player like Darnell Nurse can't log normal minutes.
You know what was really fascinating about this game is that goal that Niko Mikkola had, right, in the second period. Because before that, it looked like he was trying to get an own goal. What did you make of that sequence? Pete, you go first.
I said it on Twitter during the game. I think that's the first time in my life I've ever seen a stay-at-home defenseman put 2 shots on net at either end of the ice in a 10-second span. It was the most bizarre play that I think I've ever seen in a Stanley Cup Final, and then he gets the goal the other way. It was truly something special and a sight to behold. I can't believe it. And Niko Mikkola has found the back of the net way more than I've expected him to during these playoffs. So good for him.
Yeah, I mean, you look at that particular sequence, and for Mikko Mikkola, I mean, that finishes the game with one shot on net. I kind of joked that maybe he was deciding that he thought going over 1.5 shots on goal was a potential avenue, and he figured he would try and make sure that Bob wasn't falling asleep at the other end. But those are the kind of contributions that you need from some of your depth players. And I know the big storyline for the Rangers against the Florida Panthers was just wait until their stars get going. The Rangers stars never got going, and Florida dispatched them. Right now, if you're the Oilers, I know you're going home. You showed the stats, Chris, at the top, a 91% success rate for a team that takes a 2-0 series lead in a best-of-7. But the Panthers aren't even getting contributions from some of their top players. I mean, if you'd said Evan Rodriguez was going to be this team's leading scorer through the first 2 games, I think the Panthers would have been thrilled knowing that they could get out of this with a 2-0 lead and a chance to put a stranglehold on them and going into Game 3. But it's just a credit to the DNA for the Panthers team and how different this team looks than the team that went on to win the President's Trophy with 122 points years ago. Bill Zito made the decision that he goes, you know what, we're built for the regular season. We don't have that grit and tenacity, and you're starting to see it pay off. Everything that went into acquiring Matthew Tkachuk, putting themselves, on the cusp of now just needing to win 2 games out of the next 5 before they can win the first Stanley Cup in franchise history.
And for Mikkola, he's got 10 career goals, 3 of them coming against the Edmonton Oilers. Now, we've seen both sides, guys, of the Edmonton Oilers, right? Game 1, they poured it on the Panthers, and they got shut out. On this night, they only had 19 shots and come up short. So when we look at, if you're an Oilers fan, what do they have to do, or just an Oilers player and a coach, what do they have to do to get back into the series and avoid going down 3-0? Pete, you go first.
Well, Todd mentioned it. The Stars need to get going. And, where Edmonton can't be matched is the talent at the very top of their lineup. And a lot's going to be said about Connor McDavid and Leon Draisaitl in particular as to how quiet they've been to this point. But another guy that you need to look at that needs to be so much better than he was in Game 2 is Evan Bouchard, because that Edmonton Oilers blue line does not have a wealth of talent. And Evan Bouchard is one of those guys who's on the upper echelon. Typically, he's a very, very offensive defenseman, but he hasn't registered a point in the series, and he was a liability in Game 2. The pizza that he absolutely delivered to Evan Rodriguez during Game 2 to make it 2-1 was a killer, an absolute killer in the third period. It takes away any sort of momentum that Edmonton had and forced them to chase the game. And we know that Florida is a much better third period team than Edmonton is, and that's a strength of theirs. But also, there was a moment during that game, too, where Evan Bouchard had Aaron Ekblad's arm around him trying to choke him out, and he taps the arm to tap out of a chokehold. You just can't be the guy who's trying to tap out of a chokehold in the third period of a Stanley Cup Final game. I'm sorry. You want your guys to show a little bit more fight than that if you're not going to show up on the score sheet. So it was just a horrible night for Evan Bouchard.
I think to a certain extent, Pete, we're seeing that Florida grit and sandpaper mentality get under Bouchard's skin a little bit. He takes the ill-advised penalty early on in the game, and it almost felt like he could never get into a rhythm. Now, I know he did launch one of his Bouch bombs that hit the post and could have changed the dynamic of the game and, of course, the series if that puck goes in. But at the same time, Pete's exactly right. I mean, if you can get in the head of some of these young defensemen, I mean, he has to carry the load along with Matthias Ekholm on that first pairing, because after that tandem, especially if Darnell Nurse is more banged up than the Oilers are letting on, things get pretty lean pretty quickly. And if you have to insert Cody Ceci back in the mix, I mean, Philip Broberg has done everything that's been expected of and probably more. But at the same time, I mean, you wondered where some of those difference makers were going to come from the Oilers blue line. Those are the 2 players for Edmonton that can have an off night, and you saw it this evening, and it ended up coming back to bite the Oilers despite them getting that early 1-0 lead, and then the Florida Panthers scoring 4 unanswered to close things out.
And as we've seen so much in the postseason, right, it's more mental than physical in a lot of these series. Todd Fuhrman, Pete Blackburn, always giving us the best insight here about the NHL.